Newspapers around the country this morning aren't letting up on the Prime Minister over his decision to give Prince Philip a knighthood. Brisbane's Courier Mail says the wrong tone.
Melbourne's Herald Sun says tone alone. The paper reports the PM's closest allies are distancing themselves and refusing to back his decision, and there are even calls for Mr Abbott to sack his Chief of Staff, Peter Credlin, for not blocking the move. And it remains a hot topic, so let's bring in Alan Jones from 2GB in Sydney. And in Brisbane, BMAG columnist Greg Carey. Good morning, chaps.
Morning,
Alan,
guys.
where does the PM go from here? How does he dig himself out of this?
Well, I mean, this is very difficult for a lot of people, and difficult including me. I've been a long-time friend of Tony Abbott's, and I think everybody knows that. I think he's entitled to a Prime Minister's call, but if he makes the call, he's got to be prepared to accept the censure that follows. I just cannot believe this. I can hear all the arguments about Duke of Edinburgh award schemes and constitutional monarchy, and the Duke's been with us for 1,000 years and so on, but it doesn't make sense out there in Struggle Street, and the purpose of staff and everybody else is to have their antenna out and be able to advise the Prime Minister what would wear and what would not wear. And sadly, I mean, those of us who know this fellow, who's a thoroughly decent human being, he's one of the most modest people you could ever get, and he's very collegiate, but in this apparently he wasn't. And we had this business about giving $200 million to the Climate Fund when Julie Gillard went to Chile. We've got the failure to do anything about 18C, and now everyone's talking about free speech. We want to recognise Indigenous Australians in the Constitution. None of these things relate to what the average Joe out there is talking about. And here's a bloke who's made a reputation in politics for being on the wavelength of people in the street, and he just seems to have lost that touch. The reality is, David, where do we go from here? He's got to accept the censure. He's got to accept the fact that the public don't accept this, notwithstanding the fact that today every move that he makes seems to be wrong. I mean, the bloke, there isn't anyone who can bring themselves to say that he does anything decent at all, which in fact he does. He's got a totally intransigent Senate, a massive debt. The problems have got to be wound back everywhere. He's involved in making decisions that will put one or two people offside. So the last thing he needed was to give a knighthood to Prince Philip. I just don't know. There must have been a bad night's sleep.
Yes. Well, the consensus across the country seems to be it is bizarre. Greg, now, you know, this is sort of his first decision back. You know, Australia Day traditionally is a good, happy day for us all, and he doesn't usually put a foot wrong. Now there are leadership rumblings from his own party. Can he survive this? Can he survive this year?
Hard to figure. I personally don't think he will, and like Alan, I've known the Prime Minister a long time. He's a decent man, and I think many of us thought he might surprise on the upside as Prime Minister, but very sadly, I mean that, very sadly, I think it's the reverse. I don't know Peter Credlin, I bear no animus, so you hear good things, you hear bad things, but I think she's got to go. But maybe not just her. I think there needs to be a change. Somehow the Prime Minister needs to regain his mojo. He needs, as Alan said, to get back in touch with the Australian people. He's of this. See, to me, this is one of the great mysteries. He's of the Australian people. Surf lifesaving, community service. You know, loves his sport, his philosophy. This is a very interesting human being, but as Prime Minister, he's really struggling, and he obviously hasn't made that step from opposition leader to Prime Minister. So I think there needs to be a change in the dynamic of leadership. Now, whether that's Peter Credlin or however that whole thing's operating, it's not operating well. And I just don't know what went through the Prime Minister's... And you see, I think this is a serious thing. Of itself, this is a fairly petty issue. But it reflects a deeper, more serious issue, and that is, how did he come to this decision?
Yeah.
Who around him says, Prime Minister, that's a really dud idea? And you could see his colleagues out there yesterday, they're ropeable, the anger's red hot. They're out there having to defend these indefensible decisions. Can't go on much longer.
It's just changed the whole conversation, hasn't it, about stuff we probably don't need to be talking about at this day and age. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Have a lovely day.
Pleasure, guys.
We'll see you
All right,
soon.
see you next week.
Bye.